So there was a few things we wanted to go through with you, right? So this is really this is obviously our first meeting with you, and we wanted to just sort of lay out with you the way we wanted to approach the work, and some of our sort of, I guess, the big picture. You should love this, Danny, because this is the big picture stuff, right? We want to set the context for the master plan, because these type of things can get into detail really quick, right? And this first section that I want to talk about is really about making sure that we've got the kind of scope big enough to absorb what you want. Because one of the things that's obvious about your community is that there's a real appetite to do things interesting and differently, and really create quite a unique experience in the community, right? So we want to make sure that the master plan really reflects that and is forward looking. So it's looking out into the future. So I'm going to just tee this up, and Carissa, I'll ask you and Joel to just jump in wherever you want. So I'm going to just share my screen, and you've got these documents, right? But I just thought it might be just nice to go through these together on the screen. Let me see if this is the right one. So are you guys seeing a Word doc?
Yes, sir.
That says December and all that kind of stuff on it? Okay, so so this basically just about fits, you should be able to see, should just about fit the whole screen there. Let me just move it over a bit. So what this is broken out in months, right? So I want to walk through this in months. So basically what we've tried to do is we've tried to coordinate the work packages to match the scope of work, but also to take into account that you meet typically the last Thursday of each month. We want to use that meeting to be able to vet with you what we've discovered or developed during the course of that month. So that's why this is all broken out in months. So the idea is that you then get to weigh in on it at the end of each of these major segments. So if you take December, and December doesn't quite work because obviously we're a little bit early, but what we're basically doing in December, as you can see there, is we're really looking at trying to understand what are the future trends that are going to shape the way people use public spaces and people's desires for recreation and so on. And we had a session, I guess it must be a week or two ago now, with the staff, and we tried to bring in all the ideas that we had heard, right? So, people have been sort of throwing ideas at this, saying, we want to be thinking about this and this and this and these ideas, right, from the comp plan and so on. And we did a bit of a brain dump, and we're currently working up a series of emergent trends that really hit these three big areas of social and human evolution. So how do people and society evolve? And what is the implication for that for parks and recreation? Environmental and ecological trends and considerations. So, parks and trails are parts of the landscape. They have a really important function beyond just recreation. So we want to really be thinking about that. And then, of course, the economic impact of nature-based assets. And so really trying to understand how the parks and trails system can be part, and recreation can become part of the economic driver in the community. And then, of course, some asset mapping, some initial sort of eyes on. So Carissa and her team were out on site doing some inventory work on the parks. And so we're just really doing this kind of sort of future scanning and baseline assessment, right? And we're going to, in this process, we want to use the same engagement platforms that we used in the comp planning process and mirror those in this. So we'll have the discussion boards and the story maps and those things that you're familiar with. They'll be the sort of basis. So we're sort of working on putting those together. So that's sort of December, right? That's sort of the background and setting the stage. And we want to go through some of those documents tonight. So January then moves more into this community future needs assessment. That'll be primarily led by Carissa and her team, but it's really starting to dive into the evaluation of the parks, the recreation programs, the trails, and so on. Really getting that sort of audit and inventory going. Then February moves into and developing and then presenting with you the draft 10-year concept plan. So it ties together this idea of these future trends. What do we think the future needs are? And then saying, okay, here's the concept looking forward. Then March, understanding the financial impacts, doing modeling about staffing and so on. And then presenting a final plan in April. So there will be a bit of flex on this, I imagine, right? Because some parts may take a little bit longer, and we're not sure about how quickly the community will engage on some of these things. There's weather constraints, there's COVID constraints, and so on. But these are the basic building blocks that we want to work with you on to sort of get us to that end of April sort of target for when the master plan's signed off and published, right? So, Carissa, did you want to add anything to that before I ask for any questions?
Nope, I think you got it.
Okay, good. So does, and this is a working document, obviously, right? So we'll see things move around. So any questions or comments on that? Does that look to you like a reasonable plan? Does that sort of sink in with you as a committee with enough input? Basically we're asking you to weigh in on every section as we go through, for each month.
I think it looks good.
Okay. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, and this park board committee and basically this group again, we have our next scheduled meeting on January 28th of 2021 at 6 o'clock. So that's when we'll meet again and kind of do a recap as well.
Okay. Good. So fantastic. So so we'll just keep updating this, and you'll get sort of revised versions as we go, right? The other thing that I wanted to just show you, so let me, I wonder if I can switch, maybe I can't. Let me just try a different doc, right? So I want to just show you this here. Again, this is a working document, and it's some of the higher level trends that we've sort of been discussing that we want to do some, build these out a little bit. So the idea is we want to look at each one of these trends, understand what some of the data is about it, how we see it evolving, and then what are the implications for the community, right? So this again is a working document, right? So if you take these three big buckets, remember we're in chapter 1, sort of setting the context. So we've talked about the social infrastructure, so the societal and human evolution, ecological infrastructure, and the economic infrastructure. So some of the topics that we're starting to drop in, and again, it's a working doc, right? But looking at things like these trends towards blending mobility in public space. So, even to the point like what the mayor said about, Smithville has this unique opportunity to have like quite a different sort of backbone of trails and so on. Equity inclusion's a really important issue that we want to sort of understand the placemaking and civic engagement, the distributed degrees of public space. So how public space is being viewed and how it sort of fits into the community landscape, multifunctional public spaces, responsive environments, and the influence of technology, for example, public health, right? The whole sort of recreation and health components. So sort of higher level stuffs that sort of paint this canvas. And then the ecological infrastructure, which actually has been really important in the narrative, I think, in Smithville, right from the think tank, when we were starting to talk about these possible scenarios. But more specifically, things like the flood mitigation, stormwater retention, urban gardens has been talked about, eco habitats, improving air quality. So this notion that, these public spaces are important resources in part of, just cleansing the ecosystem, resilience and emergency system, reducing heat stress. So this is one, you get enough heat, but, shade and those type of things become important considerations as we think about what, climates might be like in 10 years plus. Zero waste, net zero emissions, opportunities for unique land uses and so on. Then in terms of the economic infrastructure, starting to think about things like circular economies. They're becoming much more popular as a way to think. Adaptability to future needs, the impacts of where you sit in mass urbanisation, the growth of the shared economy, how do you tie into that? Recreation as an economic driver, and project funding opportunities and so on, right? So this is a working kind of mash, but you can see that we're bringing in a lot of threads here from the comp plan and discussions that we've had through the visioning and the comprehensive planning process, but also as we started to do background work on this master plan. Each one of these topics will be sort of like a one-page treatment, right? And we want to lay out the trends, why it's important, what are the future insights, and what does it mean to Smithville, so that we have this broad enough lens and we're thinking really multidimensionally about public spaces and trails and recreation programs. So Carissa or Heather, did you want to add anything to that?
I see that Jim has in the comment area here, I'd specifically highlight using native plantings in the ecological infrastructure section. So we should really take note of that.
Yeah, we actually do have that in some of the text in the white paper. I think we talk about planting the type of species.
And I know it was talked about in some of the visioning meetings and things, but I think it's
by
worth
you mostly, Jim, actually.
Probably so.
Jim, what is it your wife does again?
She teaches, she's a writer, but she works heavily with Deep Roots, which is in Kansas City. It's native plants and that kind of stuff. She's on the board with them.
If he doesn't bring it up, he gets yelled at home.
Exactly.
Right. And he's probably at home, so tick a box, Jim.
That's right. And she's standing just off camera. No, kidding.
She got the taser.
So once we frame this up a little bit more, give us a chance to do a little bit more on this, and we can run it past you. Is that, Matt, how does that work? If we want to just bounce something out for a quick comment, are we able to do that outside of the formal committee structure? I probably should know that, but I don't want to promise anything that's not appropriate.
Yeah, no, we can bounce stuff off.
Okay, good.
David, are we going to have discussion boards set up like we did for the comp plan and the strategic plan?
Yes, we are. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so this is our thinking on this, right? So I want to now go to the white paper, which is the last part that we've been working on that tries to set the context. So I'm going to again share my screen and share this one. Okay, here we go. Okay, so again, you've got this document, but I just want to walk it through in sections with us together here, right? So, and again, this is a working document. Now, so why we came up with this, right? So one was, there's a few things. So there's a couple of teams coming together on this master plan. So Carissa and her team at Landworks, Future IQ, and Leslie from JSA. So we wanted to do something that sort of got all of our thinking together, right? And we wanted to be able to do that with Matt and Brittany, of course, and then the staff at the town, and then of course with you as the committee, right? So we sort of created this sort of framework, which is the lens that we're looking through. But the other part of this too is that because things are moving fairly fast in your community, we didn't really want to have everyone wait until the end of April for, you know, the sort of messaging, particularly when it comes to maybe investments around some of this infrastructure, or if there is, you know, potential developments that might be happening and so on. So the idea of the white paper is to telegraph broadly to people what the kind of intention is that you can expect to come through in the plan. So, you know, some background things. We know the population's growing. That's documented in the comp plan. We know the population's changing. And that becomes really significant because when you think about the parks and recreation amenities, it's trying to anticipate what the new cohorts will be. So there will be active retirees, for example. There'll be younger generational cohorts, but there might be sort of more sort of outdoor oriented young professionals or younger, child free, if that's the word, households, right? So we want to sort of be thinking about these different cohorts and be able to make sure that the design is broad enough to cater for that. You know, obviously the family-based piece is well understood, but these other cohorts are new. And then of course there's the value proposition. You know, that came out in the task force and the comp plan, is that the amenities that you have are very clearly a key part of your value proposition. So we want to amplify that as we go forward. So then we basically built out this series of high-level concepts, right? And these will probably be familiar with you, but we wanted to be very overt in these. So we wanted to be really lay this out so that everybody understands. So one is enhancing this community oasis experience. So the whole community oasis, really big deal in the narrative through the visioning and the comp plan. But we want everybody to be thinking about parks and recreation, and whether it's from a development perspective or a policy perspective, you know, everything that it happens, we want to be thinking, how does this enhance and create these either large or series of mini oasis type experiences, because that is a value that really runs deep in the community. A focus on the broad multi-dimensional outcomes, and I've touched on those, the community and societal benefit, the environmental and ecological benefit, and the economic benefit. So really thinking about how do we be smart about investments and designing things so that they have this kind of, you know, three-dimensional benefit that accrues. And actually in here is where, for example, in the environmental and ecological benefits, we talk about how the management and design of these areas can seek to minimise negative impact and maximise environmental gains. And examples could include zero waste, net zero emissions, planting, preserving and managing important ecological species, right? So, you know, calling out at that level of detail, even in this white paper, to sort of give people the sense of where this wants to go, right? The next big high-level concept is this concept of distributed recreation. So we talked about that in the comp planning process. Smithfield's really not quite at the size yet to handle a monumental type of facility, you know, which would be a big multi-million-dollar price tag, but comes with significant maintenance requirements. So the idea, at least in the interim, which is probably going to be a sort of a 10, 15 year, maybe more horizon, is to think about how to use this really fascinating spread you have and create this sort of distributed recreation where there can be recreation sort of experiences across the landscape, but are connected together in a really cohesive trail and multimodal system. I think it's a really exciting concept that really plays well, I think, to some of the values you have, but also just the geographic layout of the community. The next two high-level concepts is one is about future-oriented and innovative thinking. That has come up, and Melissa, you pushed that. If you're listening, you pushed that at, I think, every conversation I've ever had with you. You know, think outside the box, do something different here. You know, let's sort of use our resources and sort of make a mark. And then embracing a collaborative approach. So really thinking about, I think that's about how do you really leverage the money that you are raising through the sales tax, and there will be a correction on this one here. It says the Parks and Rec sales tax are dedicated funds. It's actually also stormwater, right? So that was mine bad there. So we'll just change the wording a little bit on that. But the idea of that is how do you maximize that? How do you build partnerships with the county, other funding sources, developers, and so on, to really, you know, every dollar you put in has, you know, multiple dollars worth of benefit across the community or across the Parks and Rec sort of system. And then a few specific high-level priorities. And again, this is at kind of white paper concept level, developing a Parks and Rec's branding strategy, you know, really coming up with some strong identifiable brand that sort of, you know, with sort of, I guess, wayfinding type sort of thinking. Complement and distinguish the city's park system. Obviously, the county is a big investment in their resources that sit right next to you, that you really get a lot of use and benefit from, but really find that as a complementary component. The north-south trail connectivity, talked about that over and over. There's a whole section in the comp plan about this ability to be able to connect the community from top to bottom and then plug into regional trails. Multimodal connections. That's probably going to be an overlap, I think, Matt, with the transportation plan. So I think that's going to be another area where there'll be some really interesting synergy and other sort of policy tools that could come to play. And then, of course, these last two probably could almost be one, but this whole downtown Riverwalk Lake connection, which is, you know, underway, obviously, so important, and this sidewalk culture. So how does all this play together to create that really important downtown experience? And then there's anticipated policy implications. So we're going to start actually internally talking about policy implications tomorrow. But this is intended to be high level, right? To throw it out there, to telegraph to the community and to possible interested parties, developers and so on, and other players like the county, what the sort of mindset is, I think, that's going to go into shaping the master plan. So, Carissa, do you want to add anything, or Joel or Heather? Do you want to add anything as commentary to this before I ask Matt to weigh in?
If I can say something, I think the value of this document is that it gives you, the city, a real decision-making tool. I mean, anything that comes into you, you can say, you can see if it's addressed somehow with this lens. I think it's really helpful. And so those principles are going to be really important as you make decisions with development.
Okay. And Matt or Cynthia, do you want to add anything to this before we open it up for comment or question?
I know this committee didn't see the first draft, but I do appreciate you guys, David and Chris and the team, working to get in those different areas that we would like to see, and I think we hit those in this new updated draft. So I appreciate that.
Okay. All right. So let me stop sharing my screen so we can have a chat, right? And so let's. What do you think of that? So you've got a copy in your inbox as well, right? We've gone through it. Do you think we're in the right space? Are we being too frothy and sort of like too giddy on this, to use your term, Mayor? Or do you think that's kind of laying out an ambitious enough canvas to paint the master plan into, or does it? You know,
So one thing from my side of this is you saw it in the strategic plan, the think tank, and the comp plan. Parks came up a lot. And Parks Board is one I've never really had a problem getting people to want to be part of. Sometimes they learn what all that entails and they don't want to do the day-to-day and the monthly meetings, but there's definitely an interest in our parks and the county parks in this area for recreation. I mean, it's a giant lake, so let's hope people like that. But yeah, it's and Cynthia could probably weigh in on this a little more too, but the importance of having documents like this, especially for staff and everyone else, and communicating the story outside of Smithville, on the streetscape, strategic plan, comp planning, the stuff that our public works department's working on. This is stuff we can go out and get grants for, because we have funding for it now. We have a park sales tax. We have a community desire for these things. So when we present it outside of Smithville to other entities like Mid-America Regional Council or the RTP program, which Matt, we got a 20% match on the trail with that one.
Yep.
A little over 250,000 in climbing dollars because of our planning. And this document will help us do that for that. We found out this week, or maybe they found out last week, but Mid-America Regional Council is helping fund Streetscape Phase 3 and more sidewalks. So
Nice.
about $1 million worth of
That's awesome.
funding, which is a lot, right? So the more planning we can do and the better we can tell the story and have that passion behind these projects, the more things like that we can go after.
Yeah, and that's great, Mayor, because I think what the white paper should do, if we got it right, it reflects your ambition as a community, but you can see it tees up perfectly to then frame policy, right? Which is more your tools, but it also frames your proposition as to create partnerships with people.
One of the things some of you may not know, you know, when you have a house in a subdivision in Smithville that's built today, they pay a parks impact fee. And until recently, unless it was a house in a subdivision, they didn't pay a parks impact fee. So you're building on a 5-acre lot, they didn't pay that same fee that my house in a subdivision paid, but they're using the parks just as much. So that helped us as a board change that policy so that now that if you're building something residential, you're helping contribute to the parks now.
All right, great. So throw this open for comment. We need your guidance here, right? So do you think this is on the right track? You know, if it hit it perfectly, great. If you think there's gaps, we want to know about that. If you think, you know, it's overshooting, let us know that too. So Danny, maybe we could start with your thoughts. You're the chair, you're the president, right?
Yeah, I think it looks great. It's definitely a good frame to kind of work some ideas from all the previous planning that's been, ooh, careful, but oh, that's coffee, hold on. Be okay? sorry, child, coffee, computer. But I think just all the discussion and all the planning and everything that's been done over the last year or so, I think we've gotten a lot of opinions from people. We've gotten some really good ideas from people, and I feel like that was a good basis to start off to kind of like get into our little niche and really grow that the way that it needs to, so it's the most impactful for the community. I think it's great. It looks good.
And Danny, you sent me a lot of text like right in the beginning of October, and when David was reading the enhancing the community oasis experience, kind of that last sentence, including elements such as shade, noise, view, and then the concentration of people, I think met those. When you were talking about the different landscaping that you saw on your trip to Colorado. With like the feel of the plants, the smell of the plants, and kind of that area in the landscaping. So does that make sense of kind of putting that in there as well?
Yeah, if you don't know exactly what Matt's referring to, when we were in Estes Park, there was just one particular park. It was like a sensory garden. And so it was like plants that were like visually beautiful, plants that smelled really nice. There were some that were like fuzzy or spiny or whatever, but like it was a full sensory kind of thing. It was really fun. And there were a lot of really creative things that I saw that I thought were interesting, where they took spaces that would just be kind of undesirable. So there was like one area that was kind of like a walkway tunnel that went under the highway. And I was like, I don't know if we want to go in there. But as you get in, like they had this really beautiful like artwork that goes like leads all the way into it. And then they had like a laser light show that goes on the inside that like shines down on the floor, kind of like what you see on people's houses right now with all the Christmas lights, like the laser lights. It's basically that, but like they're on the ground. And my 2-year-old lost his mind, loved it so much, and had a blast just walking through a random tunnel from one side of town to the other. So, but it was, it's just that kind of thing where it's like we have little bits of space where I know that we have a lot of land in town that belongs to the Parks Department that could be utilized for things just to like serve the community more than just like we have it, we mow it, it's there. But there's definitely a lot of potential in that area, and I'm looking forward to like kind of what Jim was talking about with a lot of the natural grasses and stuff. I know this year Matt knows I got super excited this year because there was a big field back behind our soccer fields this year that like didn't get baled like it normally does because of COVID. Like things just didn't happen. And I was like, dude, it is the most beautiful wildflower field I've ever seen. I'm a photographer. And so I was like, I took clients out there and we took pictures, and I was like, we need to capitalize on this. It's beautiful. It's amazing. And he was like, literally, we just didn't bale it this year. But I'm like, never mow this ever. But it's just little stuff like that where it's like, it's this big piece of property, but I'm like, yeah, let's utilize that, cut a path through it, let people walk, go on nature walks or camp or whatever back there. But I think it'd be fantastic. But yeah, just little stuff like that. I think just utilizing the space that we have.
It's funny, Danny, that you brought that up, because that's one of the things that I hate that we mow as much as we do. But I guarantee you, Matt got more phone calls yelling about the grass not being cut than your one compliment. That's the thing. We need to get your voice out there more. That I get. That's one of the things I brought up. I'm like, why do we mow all of this? It's literally one of our biggest expenses in equipment and gas, and mowers don't have emission standards, and green grass that's just standard lawn grass does nothing. Water, carbon, like it's literally just pretty. And the first time I went out and talked to Brett at the Parks Barn, he was flipping the hitch on the wing mower because it had worn out on one side, and they got double the life out of it by flipping it. And they could continue to use that connector for a little while longer. I'm like, why are we mowing so much? And David's seen that email from me too. We need to quit mowing. So, having natural grasses, having trees that are made for the area, having edible agriscaping, and even goats and sheep and things in the parks. Like if we want to embrace that agriculturalness of Smithville, why not have the park goats that are maintained and taken care of by the person that has goats on the go and takes care of it for the whole metro? They'll live
That's
right
fantastic.
She lives
They
on
could be
W
our
Highway and she's dragging goats all over the city. Why don't we have goats in our own parks?
they
Like,
could be our parks mascots, you guys.
Exactly.
And
We
I
put them
will
in sweaters and bow ties. It'll be so
Goat
great.
yoga.
yeah.
Yes.
That's a thing.
Oh, Jim.
It's a
I know
thing.
Brittany wants the goats for her yoga classes.
My daughter has sent pictures of her and her husband doing goat yoga, and she just about flipped her wig. They
but
were
it's
having
funny,
so
I
like
much
love
fun.
that.
when Margaret first moved up here, one of her first outreach was to the city of Smithville, and they're like, absolutely not, we're not putting goats in our parks. Sorry.
She asked the wrong people.
That's right.
Ask Danny Wilson. She'll put sweaters on.
So
them.
I'll be like, yes, girl, let's make this happen. What do I have to do? The other thing though is like my dad and I, we're big honeybee people. My dad still raised honeybees, and like I've helped him do it since I was
Wow.
like 4. And so like when I went out in that field, I was like, there are honeybees, there are
Oh.
all kinds of insects. And of course, when I take photography clients out there, they weren't super thrilled about all the bugs, but there were bugs. It was loud because there were like so many insects flying everywhere. And I was like, the honeybee is going out, guys. Like we gotta leave this stuff here. We gotta save the bees, feed them,
Yep.
just let them do their thing. But
and I will
yeah,
say
it's great.
Yeah.
I will say that Joel and I had a great conversation about opportunities we had at Smiths Fork Park for that kind of wildflower natural grass area out there. So it's definitely on their mind over there.
Yeah, and at Wildflower Park, it's literally named Wildflower Park. I mean, you've got a good water source through it. You know, sunflowers and wildflowers. It gives some good pictured backdrops and lots of opportunities
People
for
travel for that.
social
Yeah.
media like crazy as sunflower fields, right, Brittany?
Yeah,
Social
Grinner
media expert.
Farms is
Yeah, for
insane
sure. I love the
during
idea.
when everything's blooming. It's crazy over there. But there's also, I know Clay County has a really small one. I think it's over by Crow's Creek that they didn't plant this year, but they planted in the past. It's a real small plot of property, but it's like short sunflowers, and people go crazy over it and like go out there and run around in it. But they just basically let it go to the birds. But it's a pretty neat little spot.
You know,
Josie, you're up.
but what you're talking about here is actually really, so it's really interesting if you think about this just from the sort of creative ideas there, Danny, through to what does it look like in a concept plan for a park and rec plan, like 10 years out or something, is that you're really probing two quite different trends and themes, and getting the balance right is going to be really important. So one is this really natural, ecological, you know, the pollinator gardens, you know, there's a lot of kind of momentum in that world, but also local foods was a really big issue in the comp planning, so having those urban gardens, right? The other side of what you talked about might at first seem incompatible, which is like, you know, coloured laser lights and all that kind of stuff, right? But that's but Smithville's at this point, right, which is you're sort of going from just being like a country town, right, to a city with some sophistication that is going to attract people. And so figuring out where those things go and how they play together, right, I think is going to be a really interesting part of this process, because, you know, and we actually, one of the things we're going to start talking about tomorrow is public art. And we were probing this a little bit because I forget exactly, but it's like hundreds of millions of dollars they're commissioning for public art for the new airport, right? And so even if you've got the scraps from that, you'd have some really fantastic stuff, right? So that's kind of in the thinking as well, right? So, but I think that's going to require a little bit of, as we work with you as a committee, right, to really understand how you get that balance right and what goes where, right? So where does it make sense to maybe have something that's a really interesting, you know, theme kind of, you know, public art sort of space, and where is it really important to have a much more natural and sort of enhanced ecological space, right? So that's going to be part of that interface that we'll have to work with you on. Shall we keep going? So Josie, did you have, what's your reactions or thoughts?
I'm loving all these ideas we're generating. I'm loving the froth, David. I think that I think that everything's timed out really good. I agree with you, Danny, definitely. I love seeing Parks and Rec, and I live by Wildflower Park, so I'm next to all of like the garden, I guess. So the Girl Scouts actually just planted like some more trees, and I absolutely love that. And I think that the whole environmental side and the ecological benefits will be really good with this new plan. So I'm excited for that. And I'm excited to see with the rest of it, I guess. I love the I love our wildflower park up here, and I think that we definitely have lots of land that we can utilize more, even if it's just what Danny was saying. But I do agree with you, David, that we need to kind of find that balance between small town, open fields, and the sophistication. Since our population is growing, we need to kind of balance it out. And I think that we can come up with great ideas as that. So
Great, thank you. Jim?
I think back to your original kind of question about the white paper itself. I really enjoyed the strategic planning process, and I like that the main pillars of that process kind of are reduplicated within the Parks and Rec plan, and then on some of the things that Danny, you were saying about like that laser light thing and all that. It's those little things that you came back with the story, and I bet so did 1,000 other people, and they're talking about it with their families and in their communities. And those can sometimes be somewhat disparate things. Oh, they had the most beautiful section of sunflowers in this little town we visited, and oh, they had this really neat modern art display. Or I just think that it's kind of a way to set yourself up to be something unique in the Parks and Rec, and to have that diversity of things that appeal to a variety of different people. And that can include whether it's, music or visual or tactile, sensory, all those things. And then I would say also that in some of the conversations and thinking about what we were talking about just now, to me, it opens us up for partnering with other organizations as well. I'm thinking about, my wife's also on the board of the Missouri Prairie Foundation. And so the opportunity to, have a demonstration prairie plot, an opportunity to get involved with some apiarists to do beekeeping stuff and to do classes and offer opportunities for the public who would never have otherwise be exposed to that, to kind of learn a little more about it, and do walks and things about native insects. And so I just, I think it's great. And I really like the format of what you put together.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. Melissa, did you want to jump in?
Sure. I like your white paper. I think it's a really good starting point, and it really addresses a lot of what has been shared through the strategic plan and the comp plan. So I like to see that compatibility to what we've already done. So, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. Todd, did you want to jump in on anything?
It's a scaffold. I'm interested to see what gets fleshed out in it, and whatnot. I've always had the concern across the board that there's going to be a focus on putting things in certain places that are they going to get the foot traffic or the exposure that they deserve? I hear a lot of comment about downtown and everything else, and I personally very rarely go downtown. It's tight. There's very little parking. I live up the very north end of town, and I have to drive everywhere. I live in Lake Meadow subdivision. We are effectively cut off. There's no sidewalk out of this subdivision, so we have to drive everywhere. And if you don't have adequate parking or adequate places to visit these parks, that's a big concern of mine. I like the ideas that everybody's throwing out here, but I do worry about the exposure. And so, I'm interested to see how what the details in some of these are.
And Todd, those are great points. And with that park evaluation metrics that Joel and Chris did, I think if you kind of look at that, they hit a lot of those of, the usability, the connectivity, the parking, all that stuff. So that goes into that. And I think it's great to see that on paper finally to show kind of what the priorities will be for these parks going forward.
And Todd, I can't tell you a timeline, but I've been working with landowners up in that area to get at least trail connectivity for you all into Diamond Crest Park and the new Splash Park, and over to make Wildflower Park walkable, if not drivable, out to Eagle Parkway. So trust me, it's a concern of mine that you guys only have one way in and out right now. But you guys do have a park that runs right behind your subdivision that is on that list that we do need to develop, and that does connect to the splash park. So
Is
we
that
need,
the old railway?
yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
city.
it definitely needs developed. I know there's the trail between Diamond Crest and Lake Meadows, but I particularly don't even like my kids going on it. It's kind of dark. It's brush and, covered on both sides. Frankly, if you're not told it's here and shown where it's at, you can't even find it from Lake Meadows.
Right. Well, if you look, and that's what that matrix points out is, I think that park rate's probably one of the lowest. Until we put the splash park up there, probably even Danny and Josie on this board didn't even know that was a park. So, and it had that was one of the first projects that we did. Cynthia and I worked on was getting that retaining wall fixed. That was the entry from Diamond Crest to that park. So, yeah, the park's not.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, but that's just my thoughts. I'd like to see more of what's going to be proposed, as actual things, and just see how that works. Because as a person that has to commute everywhere to access these, that is a big deal. And when you go into even the county lots now, especially with COVID, you drive in and they were full.
Yep.
So you effectively don't get to use the park, or you park somebody in and you cause a lot of problems. So. Parking is a big deal for especially those of us away from the center part of town.
Yeah, well, yeah, getting you guys into that 188th Street Trail also, and down to Little Platte is a high priority. Because yeah, you guys, and that's the thing that we'll see with our parks inventory is it's very patchy. You could call it distributed, but it's just patchy, right? Somebody had a focus on this park, so they did it. Mayor Hitchborn wanted to do something for veterans, so Remembrance Park got a lot of love for a minute. Courtyard Park's not that old. Heritage Park used to be where the Legion was. Once they tore the Legion down, they had all this open space. And this is why we need to make this plan solid and make it stick, and now we have a funding source for it. So,
And that goes back to that marketing and letting people know what's here, and providing some continuity that these are Smithville parks.
yeah.
All right, good. So Cynthia or Brittany, did you want to add anything?
I don't really have much to add. I know we've talked about this before, but just making sure that the recreation piece isn't looked over. I know we have a lot of other really big priorities, but I feel like maintaining the current fields and ballparks that we have now, and kind of getting ahead of where youth and adult sports are going to be trending in the future, and just making sure that we don't neglect the recreation and sports aspect of it.
Yeah, I agree with Brittany. That's one of the things that when you guys are bringing up wildfires and these other things too, yeah, we have to make sure we incorporate those things. So Brittany can also, number one, do programming around it too, but continue to grow our rec program that's been growing like crazy since Matt was in that position. So.
All right, good. Okay, good. So we'll keep developing that out. So the next step is to, and we did add a couple of things about the recreation program. Brittany, maybe we need to strengthen that a bit, but we can work with you offline on that. Then the next part is obviously, I think Todd's sort of terminology of thinking of it as the scaffolding, and we now need to build it out, is the next part of the policy development, but then also moving into the needs assessment and in the concept plans. I think we'll really start to frame it out. So the next agenda item here is to, Carissa, if I can throw this to you and Joel to talk about the first cut evaluation, the matrix. Pass that to you.
Sure. So I guess I'll jump in. So I guess to start things off with, on December 1st, Matt, Brittany, Chris, and I, we toured 8 properties, not only, for our benefit to get boots on the ground and, really start to understand, the park spaces in Smithville and your community, but to also photograph, get a site inventory of what's existing at the park spaces, and also conduct an assessment in terms of just evaluating the parks and what's existing there and how to move forward to give us a baseline. So I'm going to share a screen here. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Awesome. So to start the assessment, we like to break down our assessments on parks into 5 categories. We do this in a way to fairly evaluate all park spaces. It's hard to take Smith's Fork Park, which is 250 acres, and compare it to Courtyard Park, which is less than 1, because A, just the size, but then also the amenities present. There's a highly different thing. So we want to look at different scoring things such as accessibility, connectivity, comfort and character, usability, and amenities. And when we do this, we break it down into individual, smaller categories to really help us kind of nail through how the park is performing. So, top 8 properties here. So here are your park properties up top, and then your evaluation for each criteria form as you work your way down. Now, if you just start at the top here, if you look at accessibility, which was one of the lower ranking categories for assessment, a lot of this was due to a lack of kind of signage, which ties into kind of branding. A lot of the park properties, not a lot, but 3 park properties are largely undeveloped, which is a huge opportunity. But because they're undeveloped, there's an accessibility issue of getting people to that site. But through this master planning process, we'll very easily we'll tackle that challenge, and we'll come up with great concepts as we move forward. Connectivity looks at not only just connecting the park spaces and their location, but what are their relationships to adjacent land uses? Do you feel safe in these spaces? This is a really high scoring category for the parks. Likewise with comfort and character, which not only looks at overall attractiveness and maintenance, which I think I'm going to do a quick segue real quick. I think Parks and Rec staff does a great job maintaining the park spaces and amenities you have right now. Put your best foot forward. And I think it's really commendable. Other ways you kind of look at comfort and character is through pleasant places to sit throughout the park spaces and protection from weather. That comes down to shade. Are there places to get out? The hot sun in the middle of summer, whether you're in your car, on a trail, watching a ball game, whatever that may be. Our last category that we kind of examine is amenities. I skipped usability here. Well, I'll go back to usability real quick. Usability is just a mix of things to do and the level of activity that we see. This, of course, comes down to programming, and as we program spaces out, we'll see that wide range, and this is an area for improvement. As far as the amenities and the conditions go, we not only look at energy and sustainability, but the condition of the sidewalks, the parking lots, the entrances, the equipment, the playground, how old is it, what kind of experience do we have with it. And so those are all factors that kind of go in. Through the master plan process, all park assessments will be made available, and they'll be included in the final document. But this is just an initial way we kind of look at and try to evaluate the park spaces. This is also a draft. We have one more park property that we need to go out and tackle, which we'll take care of here in the next week.
Lovingly called Swamp Park, we understand.
Hawthorne Park, it's not a swamp anymore. It's a beautiful corner.
So Joel,
But is it really?
They fixed the water line, so it's not a swamp anymore. Yeah.
Well, that would be one of those areas you mentioned earlier that are kind of those in-between spaces that you can really have a huge impact and kind of stand out, and aren't just.
Yeah.
It's a great pocket park opportunity, for a study of reptiles in a swamp near the school. Walkable from an elementary school.
Boardwalks are cool. Swamp, in swamps. That's great.
hey, Joel, you mentioned that you're going to be putting out the reports for each park. Will they have the criteria, for instance, visibility from distance? Is that going to be stated on there as to what that criteria was?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that was part of the overall kind of assessment and reports we release. Do you have any concerns with the assessment in terms of like visibility for a distance or that particular?
Well, what distance? Is it at the road right next to the park? Is it from a quarter mile away? What is distance there? Just like ease of walking to park, I'm kind of surprised Heritage is 3. I look at that from my perspective as a really easy one to get to, park in, and I'm right there at the park and can walk from where I park at. But relative to what position are you talking about? So that's why I'm asking on some of these criteria, what did it actually mean? Because Wildflower, depending on if you want to walk from downtown, it's a little bit of ways.
I guess part of that visibility, the distance, also sort of feeds into like a feeling of safety. Like, you know, the concept of the more eyes on the park and the visibility, you know, the safer not only a park is, but the more often you see people actually utilizing those spaces. So just having those access points where people can have their view sheds on the property, taking but we can add that as part of the.
So Joel, one thing you might want to include is, you know, our definitions of the different park types. Wildflower, for example, is a neighborhood park. It services a half-mile radius of that park, up to a mile. It's not a city park. It's a community. It's a neighborhood park. Same thing with like Diamond Crest or Emerald Ridge. They're neighborhood parks. So if the neighborhood is, if the people that are within that area, that range, can walk to that park, that's what it's designed for. Now, Smith's Fork is designed to be a city park, right? So do we have signs off of 92 Highway and 169 Highway saying that's where the city park is? And if you look at these parks too, this is something I was brought up to the Main Street crew. The majority of our developed parks are on Main Street. The only one that's not is Emerald Ridge. Main Street goes all the way to the dam from downtown. So every one of these is a Main Street park. So that's unique to Smithville. Most of the time parks are kind of distributed throughout the city, but ours have all developed along the Main Street. And some of these are neighborhood parks, some of these are pocket parks, and some of these are city parks. So if you could include that in that description, that might help people understand the difference in the parks. Because Wildflower was a development agreement requirement by the developer of that subdivision. It wasn't a city park.
And Joel, I don't know what your comfortability on sharing those links that you shared to Brittany and I that kind of had the individual sheets that kind of went over each, basically how you got there. I think that may help the committee to view that.
Sure. So,
But anyway, I love this scorecard, by the way, because it fits in line with the stuff David's provided us in the past, and it fits in line with the stuff our board's used to seeing for budget and other things. I'd like to see more things in green, Matt, but you know, we'll we'll get there. That's the point of doing this.
And Joel, it doesn't have to be today if you can't get it up. We can share those links with the committee, and they can look at that individually if you don't have time today.
Yeah, we're used to seeing a lot of raw data, thanks to David and Cynthia and others, on stuff we look at. You know, providing the raw data if we want to look at it, if we can, it's great. But I love the dashboard views too.
Sure. And I think one thing we want to do is we'll probably dress up those reports just a little bit, just so they're more appealing. It's kind of
okay.
That, but
we did create a summary of findings, so we have all what we deduced from this matrix. You've already assessed some of that stuff, but it's probably important to go into just a little bit of information. You can see that overall the parks scored fairly. The parks that were located close to downtown obviously have more connectivity and are a little more cared for, and you mentioned a little newer, so they ranked higher. Overall assessments, as we looked at the city, we do need to think about the distributions. There are gaps then in the community where the parks are located, and we need to think. We're thinking a little differently about this with the neighborhood parks, as you mentioned. Yeah, MRPA classifies those neighborhood parks as, you know, walkable within a certain radius. But as we look at this distributed recreation plan and thinking about, you could have a network to every single one of these pieces of property and do something different in one of those locations, it kind of changes the context a little bit, which is really exciting. It is really unique. We're working on we've done quite a few master plans in this region. What we're doing at this point and what you've already set this up to do is very unique.
Yeah. We got to build a city as a park that's a fully distributed park, right? With this giant county and federal park right next to us.
On board. I guess what I'm saying is that I think this is exciting. I think there's a market for these things that we're talking about. I think there's a market for the opportunities that we see. Fairly, I say we scored fairly. There were other staff members that took a look at it and said, wow, you were pretty harsh. We looked at a lot of other master plans as we've done this, and nobody wants to be that hard on the client. So, but you can't make progress if you already say, hey, you're good, right? So we recognize that the one thing that you have is potential, and that's really exciting too. You've got a lot of green space, and there's just a lot of untapped potential there that we can't wait to continue to understand what the needs are, what the wants are from your committee, from this community, so that we can start plugging in what this whole build out looks like.
And I think you're looking at it in a great way too, talking about park space as infrastructure. Going back to the very beginning, like community infrastructure, ecological and environmental infrastructure. That's unique too when you're just even considering these public spaces. So I think that's really important that you're already in that frame of mind, how to accelerate this process. Yeah, I think that's really going to drive how this all develops. That's very important. I think.
And if you look at Eagle Parkway, which goes along Diamond Crest and Wildflower Park and the county parks and 180th Street and future 188th and others, we named it Eagle Parkway because we want it to eventually be a parkway. We want it to be part of that park system. And part of the development agreement with one of the subdivisions along that is for that trail connection to be built from 188th going south. So I think we put some stuff in place, but Cynthia said we couldn't do anything else until we had a parks master plan. So we have to do this. It's a requirement. She won't give us any more money.
I'm a mean monster.
Just making sure you're still paying attention.
I am paying attention. I'm loving this conversation.
But honestly, I mean, we've got to have these plans in place, and I think this has been great.
I just a quick question: Are the development parks like the splash pad that are built by the as part of that necessity with the development, are those considered freestanding city parks or neighborhood parks, depending on the classification? But are they considered freestanding parks, or are they considered part of that particular neighborhood or development?
No, so yeah, I don't think you were on the parks board when we did this. The splash pad was built as part of their parks contribution fee. It is a public park, and as part of that agreement, we park in that parking lot where their pool and stuff is. That was part of that development agreement. And one of the things that this document is going to help us pull together is when somebody comes in to develop something. Let's say somebody comes in, they want to put in a 300-unit apartment complex, and they have to pay X number of dollars per unit to the parks contribution. What do we tick off that list? How do we if you think about it, Wildflower Park was probably not the best decision for them to take as a part of that development agreement, or even Diamond Crest, because like Todd said, it's kind of scary up there. It's not really a great park. Should the city have accepted that land as a parks contribution instead of cash when most of the developed parks were pretty far away? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? Can't fix the past. But going forward, when somebody brings a subdivision or a apartment complex or commercial development to the city and says, hey, we want to do this, and we tell them the parks contributions, $80,000 or X, and they wanted to pay that in land. Well, if that land's not desirable as part of our trail system or park system, we're not going to take it. We will take the cash, and we'll put that into a park that actually needs a project. Just like when now somebody comes to us to ask for volunteer opportunities, that you guys mentioned the Girl Scout tree planting thing. they presented, they just wanted to plant some trees somewhere. And we said, no, we have some things in place that we want to do edible type trees that are native to Missouri, and they'd be best served here versus just letting them plant a tree willy-nilly wherever they wanted to. That's really what we, and if they, Boy Scouts, they contact me for a project, I say, call Matt, he's got a list, he'll tell you what needs to be done. Like, we want that kind of same list in this for when developers come in, we want to build X, Y, and Z. Okay, great. This is your park's contribution, dollars or land, or build the trail for us because you're already rolling out concrete trucks and asphalt trucks or whatnot. So
That's awesome. Yeah,
And if
that's
I
a
could
great way
jump
to
in
do it.
here- Oh, I'm sorry, Jim. If I could jump in here a little bit also to the mayor's point earlier, and also what Carissa has said, we've got these neighborhood area parks, but when we talk about distributed recreation and trails being important in our community, it's creating that linkage. And back to the point that we made really early on, and David made the connection of, okay, where's public art appropriate? What's appropriate where in the community? And that's I'm really excited to have this discussion layered on top of our comp plan, where our comp plan outlines what is our downtown oasis, what is our, our community oasis, what makes sense where in our community, and kind of back to the mayor's point of, I said, we've not been able to do, we can't spend money till we know what we want to do. This really helps us outline that vision for Parks and Recreation for our community, so that it is not a patchwork of little things everywhere, that it is truly that distributive program for the community, that once you step back and look at it, it makes sense as a whole.
yeah, and prime example, right? But I think it was right before Matt got hired. The old Parks Board decided we were going to make Smiths Fork the soccer park, and Heritage Park will be the baseball park. We're going to tear down a baseball field. Yet we had no money to build another baseball field or to build new soccer fields. So why did we tear it down? Because they wanted it torn down because that's the soccer field. And to this day, we still do not have another baseball field at Heritage Park because we've never had a funding source for it. So that's the desire of this board, is to add add more baseball at Heritage Park, and the Parks Plan comes up with that. Now we have a funding source for it. We're not going to just fire and forget on some stuff. And back to the scoring, Joel, would we have scored better if Matt would have tore down that old playground equipment at Heritage Park, since we had the new stuff? I mean, you gave us a 4 for our equipment there when we have brand new stuff. It kind of hurts my feelings.
Hey,
There's
David.
no reason to take down the old equipment until we have something to put in place of it. It's still usable. People still use it.
I know. I'm just trying to help our
So
school.
until we're putting something there, just leave it alone.
Yeah, that's where the basketball court's going.
Eventually, but it's not there yet. So don't tear it down until you're putting in the basketball court.
Yep. Drop it off in your backyard, Danny.
So Matt, I think that covers the agenda items we were running with, right?
Yeah.
What was that, David? Kind of cut out.
I think that covers the agenda items we had, right, from our side.
Yep, correct. Yep. And so I think the next one's kind of the next steps. And I think we kind of covered that in the outline of kind of the timeline, and that we're going to get this group back together on January 28th and have some more information for you guys.
Yeah. And when we're back to Todd's point earlier on Lake Meadows, we have a lot of subdivisions like that aren't connected, right? Mine included in that. It's really sad when I see somebody pull out of one of our subdivisions on the north side with a bike on the back to drive across the bridge to a trail. I ride on W every once in a while. It's not great. At least it's got better pavement on it now. But there's no reason we shouldn't be more connected. And I think we saw that in the comp plan. We saw it in the strategic plan. We're going to see it come out of this parks plan. I don't think that we're going to change that narrative of we want trails to connect our city to be able to get from point A to point B and have our schools walkable.
Yeah, so this committee, in January is going to come up with some discussion boards. So I'll be in constant communication with you guys to get that out there and get some more feedback, not just yours, but your friends and neighbors, family members, like anybody that's connected to you guys. So just be ready for that.
Yeah, just remember Josie started on this board and she was a freshman and now she's already almost ready to graduate. So things go quick. We gotta, we can do a lot. I mean, they laid like a half-mile of trail in one day out at Smith's Fork. So
That's awesome.
we get it going.
I will say,
Power poles.
I loved that Facebook post of the Girl Scouts planting the trees. I immediately showed it to my wife because when we lived in Springfield, Tennessee, our daughter was in Girl Scouts, and we literally have that same set of pictures. It's the girls are almost in the same positions, pushing the carts and holding the shovels, and because we did trees on a greenway. So yeah, that was really cool.
I stayed out of those pictures pretty well, and the thing you don't see because we pulled dirt out of the shed up there. The Parks Department was very helpful in digging those holes. That ground is clay.
Oh
yeah. And so the backhoe dug the holes, and then the girls put the trees in them, and I got them bags of topsoil out of the shed, and we filled it in. So the pictures. It's great to have those trees, but yeah, that ground is hard up there. So we gotta remember that we're in Clay County. We need stuff that will penetrate this ground.
Native trees.
Native trees.
I would like to give a shout out to whoever runs the Instagram and TikTok now.
No.
That's super awesome.
No, you're not.
Is it you, Brittany? So
Thank
awesome.
you.
We got some apps that teens actually can get on and relate to, and it's great. And I've had actually like friends come and tell me like, do you run this? And I'm like, no, it's not me. But it's super awesome, and I'm glad you're on Instagram and TikTok now. So
thank you so much. I love to hear that.
I did not know you were on TikTok. I'm gonna have to check that out now because but Instagram looks fantastic. The Facebook looks fantastic. Everything looks really great.
Yeah.
Well, shout out to Danny too for taking some of those pictures and getting some good content, because our parks do have some improvements that are needed, but you did a great job capturing that, and Brittany's doing a great job promoting that. But we need to give you guys more places to get that content and promote people coming up here. I was talking to the farmers market the other day. They've only been open for a couple months. They've had over 500 visitors based on their unique sales. Our downtown draws. I've got people that are consistently coming back to our downtown for not just the shops, but chops in different places. I know David loves just to come to Chops, even though he's a vegetarian. He still finds something there to eat. But our downtown does draw. I look at the heat map of our bike races. I look at the heat maps of our sales from the different folks I work with that are on the same type of system I'm on for Square. And we can see where those people come from, and it's a good range. So there's multiple visits from individuals I know in South Dakota and in Emporia, Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, down south, Arkansas. We are starting to get that draw for this, especially the cycling community and the people trying to get out of town in the local area community.
Once we get past COVID.
COVID, I think, is
now we got a restaurant down there and everything.
I think COVID's actually Matt and I. When COVID first started, it was every 10 feet around the lake there was probably somebody fishing, right? And our parks were,
I did more camping this year than I have in I don't know how long.
How many people did we have to turn away at the campground this year, Matt? That just because we didn't have the service for them?
Yeah, it was over 100. I know we were for almost a month, almost 2 months, but we still made almost the same amount of profit as we did last year. So that's just how busy it was throughout the year. So yeah, it was pretty impressive, to say the least. Well, cool, guys. As always, as you get ideas or see ideas, feel free to pass it on to me, and I can pass it on to the team, and we can get those in there. But for now, David, if you don't have anything else, Danny, you could call a meeting to an end if you'd like.
Yeah, I keep like muting and unmuting, and then I'm like, oh, children and two dogs. So I don't think we need this necessarily, but I wanted to make sure to make the ask just for anyone. Will there be any new business besides the obvious purpose of the business for next month? Well, does anyone have anything in particular that they want to discuss for next month?
I'd like to hear about the dog park opening.
Dude, you and me both.
There is,
What?
Cindy and I were talking about this. We were going to look at proposing some wording, phrasing on the new trail policies, on different policy and procedures, rules, anything like that. So you may see something like that, but we're in the really early stages on that. So, but that could be something, like we gotta allow motorized scooters, bikes, anything like that on the trail as their speed limit things. So we'll look into that and propose some to you guys that you guys can recommend to the Board of Aldermen.
Good. That's good.
Yeah, the timing on this plan aligns well with our budget planning. So as soon as we roll into this, it'll roll out, and we could have some of these items out to bid this time next year, or back from bid this time next year, right? That's how fast this moves. So.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we will have this meeting adjourned. Anyone wants to make that motion and second it?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.